රෝස සුවඳ තවත් දෙකු කලක් රැඳෙන්න ඩබල් පර්ෆියුම් ලුක් සමගින් එන best ever sunlight rose.
Tonight, gone but not forgotten, Sri Lanka remembers the 2019 Easter attacks and the lives lost as justice continues to be delayed. Urgent measures. The opposition submits a proposal for the 21st Amendment to the Constitution that seeks to clip presidential powers. About time. Finance Minister Sabri tells foreign media that a revision of the country's tax structure is seriously on the cards. Not done. Police probing the Ramukkana killing are wrapped for attempts to alter B report information as witnesses are granted police protection. All this and much more coming up tonight on First at 9 this Thursday, the 21st of April 2022.
වැඩිම ආරක්ෂාව අඩුම මිලකට කෙටයක් රුපියල් 54යි.
From AdaDerana, this is AdaDerana First at 9. Live from Studio 24 in Colombo.
News from across the island. This is First at 9 and I'm David Ebert. Now today marks the third commemoration of the 269 victims of the Easter Sunday attacks that took place 3 years ago, leaving over 500 persons injured. Commemoration ceremonies were worked off at the shrines that became targets of the deadly attacks. The call of the Catholic community to the government is to fulfill justice without dragging it further by implementing the recommendations of the report of the Presidential Commission that probed the Easter Sunday attacks. On Easter Sunday, the 21st of April 2019, people arrived as usual at Christian and Catholic shrines to take part in religious services prior to the celebration of the festivity with their family members. However, some of them at that time never knew that there would be no journey back home. That morning, a series of explosions carried out by a group of extremists targeted several churches and hotels that turned the day into one of bloodshed and terror. Starting from St. Anthony's Shrine in Kochikare at 8:45 am, explosions also targeted St. Sebastian's Shrine in Katuwapitiya Nigambo and the Zion Church in Batiklo. The Cinnamon Grand, Kingsbury and Shangri-La hotels too became targets of this ruthless terrorist attack. That same afternoon, 2 more explosions were reported at the Tropical Inn Lodge in Devala and Dematagoda when police and security forces personnel cornered some of the suspects. The end result was the loss of 269 lives, including both foreigners and locals, leaving over 500 others injured. It was then revealed that the attack was carried out by a group of Islamic extremists affiliated to the extremist National Tawhid Jamaat organization, headed by Zaran Hashim, its ringleader. However, the most shocking aspect of this attack was that the authorities had been in possession of an early intelligence warning from the island's closest neighbor. Despite this, the authorities failed to act, leading to the loss of innocent lives. While investigations were ongoing to arrest those who aided and abetted the suicide bombers, then President Maithripala Sirisena appointed a Presidential Commission of Inquiry to probe the attacks. On the 1st of February 2021, the Commission's final report was handed over to President Gotabaya Rajapaksa, who was elected to office in November 2019. The report called for the start of criminal proceedings against former President Sirisena for leaving the country in the days preceding the attacks without appointing an acting Minister of Defence. The Commission also faults then Director of the State Intelligence Service, DIG Nilantha Jayawardena, of not attaching the proper weight to the threat warning when he conveyed it to President Sirisena prior to his departure. The Commission also recommended that the Attorney General institute criminal action under Penal Code provisions against then Defence Secretary Hemosiri Fernando and former Chief of National Intelligence, DIG Cisra Mendes. Indictments were then filed against the former IGP Pujit Jasundara and former Defence Secretary Hemosiri Fernando for negligence. However, they were acquitted and released early this year. Over a year has passed since the drafting of the PCOI report and its long list of recommendations for criminal proceedings against several senior officials. However, none of them have been implemented so far. Until then, the people who lost their loved ones and those who still bear the scars of their injuries continue to mourn and await the day they can witness the perpetrators being meted out justice. With today marking 3 years since the attacks, a remembrance ceremony to commemorate the lost victims was held at the St. Anthony's Shrine in Kochikade under the patronage of Archbishop of Colombo, His Eminence Malcolm Cardinal Ranjit, and Apostolic Nuncio to Sri Lanka, His Eminence Archbishop Brian Udaive.
the church and the people of goodwill continue to pray and ask for justice for the martyrs of that attack. Praying also for the perpetrators and those with similar inclinations. Let us renew our commitment to never let such atrocities happen again, encouraging the authorities in their effort through the services of their security agents to ensure that this does not happen again.
Besides, there are different elements in the Presidential Commission report and information provided by some others that are recommended or need to be investigated further. Yet no such investigations have been conducted up to now. Given this entire situation, we see that an attempt has been made to somehow lay the blame only on the radical elements of the Islamic community while protecting all the others who have had something to do with these attacks, either in the manner of direct involvement or in the manner of not carrying out their duties to prevent them. Needless to say that the toll was heavy, with the loss of 269 lives, out of which 47 foreigners from 14 different countries. The erroneous way in which selective carrying out of the recommendations have been done is another indication of manipulation of the whole attempt to get the truth and seeking to only show the responsibility of the Islamic community for these attacks and trying to hide the rest of the facts deliberately.
Meanwhile, a service was also held at St. Sebastian's Church in Katupitia to remember the lost victims of the Easter attack.
අපේ යදුම්
In Batticaloa, the Zion Church too held services to remember their lost parishioners. Now, the main opposition, Samagi Janabalawege, has put forward a set of proposals for new amendments to the Constitution, including the abolishment of the executive presidency and the repealing of the 20th Amendment. The draft resolution has been handed over to the Speaker of Parliament, Mahinda Yapabewardena. In its proposals, the SJB also seeks a tripartite system of checks and balances and the establishment of independent commissions and a National Security Council.
ඇමරිකාවේ හිටපු ඒබ්‍රාම් ලින්කන් කියන ජනාධිපතිවරයා ප්‍රකාශයක් කරලා තියෙනවා පුජ්‍යලයේගේ නියම තත්ත්වය හඳුනා ගන්න යාට බලතල දෙන්න ඕන කියලා. අද මම හිතන්නේ ඒක වෙලා තියෙනවා. අපි ඒක නිසා තමයි අද පාර්ලිමේන්තුවට ගෙනාවේ 21 වෙනි සංශෝධනයේ විදියට විරුද්ධ පක්ෂයට අපිට කරන්න පුළුවන් පාර්ලිමේන්තුවේ පෞද්ගලික මන්ත්‍රී යෝජනාවක් ඉදිරි මේක ඉදිරිපත් කරේ. තමුන්නාන්සේ නමුනාද කරේ 19 වෙනි සංශෝධනයේ තිබ්බ සියලුම ප්‍රජාතන්ත්‍රවාදී ලක්ෂණ තමුන්නාන්සලා අයින් කරා. අයින් කරලා ඒකාධිපතියෙක් හැදුවා. ඒකෙන් අද රටක් විනාශ වෙලා තියෙනවා. අපි මේ යෝජනා කරන්නේ පාර්ලිමේන්තුවට බලතල දෙන්න. ජනාධිපතිගේ බලතල අයින් කරලා නාමික ජනාධිපතිවරයෙක් විදියට පත් කරන යෝජනාව තමයි අපි කියන්නේ. අපි 21 යටතේ අපි යෝජනා කරලා තියෙනවා ස්වාධීන කොමිෂන් සභා ස්ථාපනය කරන්න. ව්‍යවස්ථාදායක සභාව ඇති කරන්න. ඒ වගේම විගණන කොමිසම ප්‍රසම්පාදන කොමිසම ඒ වගේම මේ රටේ සාමාන්‍ය ජනතාවට රාජ්‍ය පාලනයට උපදේශනයක් දෙන්න අවස්ථාවක් මේක ඇති කරලා තියෙනවා. අපි රාජ්‍ය සභාව මේක උපදේශන සභාවක්. මේ රටේ අගමැතිවරයා, කතානායක, විපක්ෂ නායක, ආරක්ෂක ඇමති, මුදල් ඇමති, විදේශ ඇමති, වෙනත් පක්ෂවල නියෝජනය කරන මන්ත්‍රීවරයෙක්, නීතිපති සහ විවිධ ශේෂ්ඨ නියෝජනය කරන පාර්ලිමේන්තු මන්ත්‍රීවරු මුදලට ගෙනියන එක. අපි මේකේ යෝජනා කරලා තියෙනවා පාර්ලිමේන්තු මන්ත්‍රීවරයෙකුට හෘද සාක්ෂියට එකකම ඡන්ද දෙන්න පුළුවන්. හැබැයි අනිත් පක්ෂයට ගිහිල්ලා ඇමති තනතුරු තානාන්තර ගන්න බෑ කියලා අපි මේ පනත් කෙටුම් පතෙන් අපි යෝජනා කරලා තියෙනවා.
Meanwhile, Tamil Makal Thesiya Kuttani parliamentarian C.V. Vigneswaran addressed the House where he asked the question of whether the change being seen on the horizon would be a permanent one if the people's current problems are sorted out. He explained that this is the biggest question among the Tamil community.
For the first time, our people, more especially our youngsters, are beginning to realize the humanity of our people wherever resident on this island. They are beginning to realize that the Tamils are not terrorists but human beings. They are beginning to realize that the Muslims are not extremists but human beings. They are beginning to realize that the upcountry Tamils are asking for an increase in their daily wages because they are human beings. That the Catholics are not anti-Buddhist but human beings. They are beginning to realize that scheming politicians and their backboneless, slavish, corrupt officials, in order to keep themselves in power and to cover up their dishonest behavior and the robbing of the assets of the country, have been setting one community against the other, one linguistic group against the others, one religious group against the others, and so on, all in the name of religion and patriotism. What you sow, you reap. It is as simple as that. If you sow manioc, you could not harvest paddy, and vice versa. Politicians are paying for their sins and the people for their stupidity. It was made out that the minorities were planning and plotting to exterminate Sinhala Buddhists, and the people believed this canard and voted in large numbers for their godsend deliverer and his parties. Now they realize that they had been taken for a ride. Goldface Green reverberates with their anger and anguish. We cannot allow our anger to take control and make us act rashly. When taking our steps, we should tread with caution. No doubt there are anachronisms among our midst. They have been identified and exposed. They need to go. But what's next if they go? Could the country be stable? Could we all agree on a smooth transfer of powers from the individual to the many, from an executive presidency to a parliamentary democracy? Even if we do, what strategies are there to reverse our downward trend economically and politically? Tamil-speaking are not sure if the enlightenment that has engulfed our majority community, especially the youth among them, would be a permanent or temporary feature. If fuel is available tomorrow, electricity ceases to be cut, medicines are not in short supply, and food items come back to the retail shops, would we slide back to our old beliefs, is the question that is asked. Would there be a change in the perception among the majority community hereafter? If so, our Tamil diaspora could come to the aid of Sri Lanka. Our Tamils, both local and diaspora, are prepared to get involved in the resuscitation of the country's finances if our political and social aspirations are met by the central government.
The parliamentary group of the ruling Sri Lanka Podujana Peramuna has decided to continue with the government under Prime Minister Mahinda Rajapaksa, the PM's office said today. A unanimous decision has been taken at the parliamentary group meeting of the ruling Sri Lanka Podujana Peramuna to strengthen and continue with the government under Prime Minister Mahinda Rajapaksa, the PM's office said. The parliamentary group convened a meeting at the Parliament complex today and unanimously approved the proposal, the statement said. During the meeting, MP Sahan Pradeep had proposed that given the current state of affairs in the country, the government should face it head-on, and for that the government should continue with the leadership of Prime Minister Rajapaksa. All parliamentarians had voted in favour of the proposal, which was then ratified by MP Sahan Pradeep. The statement added that the relevant ministers had explained the steps taken to provide relief to the people in the coming weeks at the meeting. Minister of Power and Energy Kanchana Wijesekara had explained that necessary measures have been taken to resolve the fuel and power crises within a couple of weeks, while Minister Ramesh Patirana expressed hope that the gas issue could also be resolved within a couple of weeks as well. And we'll be back with more local news right after this break. Stay with us.
Big 3.
Welcome back. Finance Minister Ali Sabri, who is in Washington, D.C., holding talks with the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank, says that Sri Lanka will look at revising its tax structure very soon. He made these comments when speaking to Bloomberg today. Finance Minister Ali Sabri, in an interview with Bloomberg during his Washington visit for talks with the IMF and the World Bank, has expressed confidence that the country's tax structures will be revised to make the country competitive once again.
Basically, our talks have been centered around restructuring, and along with that to go forward for a proper program with the IMF. So IMF program requires debt restructuring when they come to the finding that debt is not sustainable any longer. So creditors, some of them or a couple of them have reached out, and wherever they are, we are willing to meet them. But these are all early days. We have just announced about a week ago, and now we are in the process of appointing those financial and legal advisors. Once that comes, we'd formally look into that. Yes, we need to sequence this properly because Sri Lankans have already been under pressure because of the depreciation. We have floated the dollar, as a result of which Sri Lanka has seen depreciation about 60 to 70% of their currency. That has kind of resulted in inflation and also resulted in food inflation. So we need to be careful on that and sequence of it. But Our 8.6% of the GDP as tax revenue is unthinkable. We need to go back to 13 to 14 level at least on the medium term for us to be competitive in the field, and we understand that. So we are working with the multilateralists and all the other institutions and think tank. How do we do it and how do we sequence it? So yes, there is a desire to do that, and we will do it. Yeah, at this point in time, we are talking to the state. China had been a very close ally of Sri Lanka for a long period of time. We have had historical tie for 60, 70 years from the days of the rubber rice pack. So we are talking to them, we will discuss with them, and even we are in the process of discussing with them some cash infusion into the system. So we are confident that we can reach some sort of a reasonable consensus.
Meanwhile, the finance minister has held meetings with several IMF officials and US government arms as well. A high-level engagement was held with the U.S. Department of State, Assistant Secretary of the Bureau of South and Central Asian Affairs, Donald Lu, and Chief of the Economic Unit of the U.S. Department of State, John McDaniel, as well as with USAID Deputy Assistant Administrator, Anjali Kaur. The discussions had focused on a variety of options and solutions for strategic economic development for short-term and mid-term challenges, a Finance Ministry statement revealed. The statement added that the Finance Minister has received the assurance of valuable support from the institutions to strengthen the economy of Sri Lanka. Meanwhile, Minister of Finance Sabri also met with IMF Managing Director Kristalina Georgieva, where she has assured her sincere commitment to work together towards mapping a pathway to assist in the economic recovery of Sri Lanka. The discussions had focused on policy actions required to address the economic challenges. Now, Foreign Minister Professor G.L. Piri states that India will provide an additional $500 million financial assistance in fuel credit to Sri Lanka. Meanwhile, India has also urged the International Monetary Fund to urgently provide financial assistance to Sri Lanka. Foreign Minister Professor G.L. Pires announced yesterday that India will provide an additional $500 million financial assistance to buy fuel to the Sri Lankan government to battle the country's financial crisis. Speaking to the media, the minister added that the government of Bangladesh too has also expressed willingness to postpone repayment of its $450 million swap to ease the country's burden. The foreign minister explained that with IMF assistance set to take about 6 months to arrive, the island will need to find funds to keep the people supplied with essentials in the intervening period. This will be the second $500 million tranche India has provided so far in fuel credit to the Sri Lankan government. The first line of credit was used up earlier this month to pay for a series of fuel shipments. So far, the line of credit has provided nearly 400,000 tons of fuel to Sri Lanka. India, meanwhile, has also extended 2 credit lines worth over $2 billion to help buy food, medicines and other essentials. At the same time, India on Tuesday also urged the International Monetary Fund to urgently provide financial assistance to Sri Lanka. Meanwhile, according to Reuters reports, India and Sri Lanka have also begun talks and proposals to link electricity grids this week. This is being seen as a step that could help to reduce China's influence over Sri Lanka. Meanwhile, the Chinese government has decided to provide emergency humanitarian assistance to Sri Lanka to help the country cope with its current difficulties.
According to foreign media reports, the Chinese government has decided to provide emergency humanitarian assistance to Sri Lanka. A spokesperson for China International Development Corporation, Zhu Wei, stated that China has noticed Sri Lanka's economic difficulties. As traditional friendly neighbor to Sri Lanka, the Chinese government has decided to provide emergency humanitarian assistance to the country to help it cope with the current difficulties. Zhu added that they believe the Sri Lankan government and people will overcome the temporary difficulties and maintain economic and social stability and development. Meanwhile, the Chinese embassy in Colombo, taken to its Twitter handle, said the details of emergency humanitarian aid will be announced in the coming days. Now, the Kegalle magistrate expressed her displeasure over the conduct of the police with regard to investigations of the fatal shooting incident that took place in Rambukana last Tuesday. With that, the IGP has ordered the DIG in charge of the CID to take the investigations under his purview and submit him a report in 3 days. Further, the OIC and the SP of the Rambukana Police and the SSP of the Kegalle Police have also received transfers in order to make the investigations more transparent and independent. Following the consideration of facts presented by the police pertaining to the fatal shooting incident during the Rambukana protest, Kegalle Magistrate Vasana Navaratna arrived at the protest site for an inspection yesterday. Recording evidence, one witness alleged that a police officer had attempted to intimidate him to prevent him from providing evidence. The magistrate then ordered the police to remove the officer in question from the investigation process. Meanwhile, lawyers who also joined the site inspection accused the police of trying to subvert the investigations.
Following a 5-hour site inspection, the magistrate then arrived at the Rambukana District Hospital, where the remains of the deceased protester has been kept. Meanwhile, when the case was taken up at the Kegalle Magistrate Court at 9 p.m. yesterday, the attention of the magistrate was drawn to an alleged attempt by the police to alter the contents of the B report using correction fluid. Attorneys representing the protesters then argued that such an act was punishable with up to 7 years imprisonment. The attorneys also requested the magistrate to provide security for their clients, as they feared that the police could intimidate witnesses, and upon this request the magistrate ordered the ASP of Kegalle to ensure their protection. The magistrate then ordered the case to be taken up for consideration today. Further, the brother of the deceased, who was in police custody, was released on 2 surety bails with an order to appear before courts on the 28th of April. Meanwhile, today the case was taken up for hearing after the curfew imposed on the Rambukana area was lifted at 5 a.m. today. During the hearings, the magistrate expressed displeasure over the police conduct in the investigations. It was revealed that the police had recorded evidence consisting of only 2 pages and have not reached out to the government analyst for assistance. The magistrate then ordered the police to obtain the report of the government analyst immediately. Further, the police delay in seeking a magistrate order to conduct an investigation into CCTV footage was also revealed. Taking the facts into consideration, the magistrate ordered the case to be taken up for hearing again tomorrow. Meanwhile, issuing a media communique, the Department of Government Information stated that the IGP has ordered the DIG in charge of the CID under the purview of the CID and submit a report within 3 days. With the final rites of the deceased protesters set to be held tomorrow, the IGP has also requested military assistance to maintain peace in the area tomorrow and the day after. Further, the OIC and the SP of Rambukana Police and the SSP of the Kegalle Police have received transfers to allow the agreed parties and witnesses in the incident to take part in investigations and court proceedings independently.
Now, victims of the Easter Sunday attack have been remembered at the Goldface Green protest site today, calling for justice to be delivered to them soon. Furthermore, anti-government protests worked off today, strengthening calls for the government to resign.
Today, which marks the 13th consecutive day of the anti-government protest, was mainly allocated to commemorate those who lost their lives from the Easter Sunday attacks that took place 3 years ago. At the Go to Go Gama protest site in Goldface Green, the protesters observed a 2-minute silence to remember the victims. Black flags were displayed by protesters and a silent protest was worked off to condemn the Easter Sunday attacks. The protesters also called for justice to the Easter attack victims. Further protests conducted by several groups arrived at the protest site today in a bid to strengthen the anti-government demonstrations. Meanwhile, last night public demonstrations worked off condemning the fatal shooting incident that took place in Rambukana last Tuesday. In the meantime, police spokesperson Nihal Talduwa said today that the police officer attached to the Kegalle police station who recently joined the Goldface Green anti-government protests has been interdicted. The police officer was placed under arrest by the Colombo Fort Police on the 14th of April and was granted bail after he was produced before the court. In more development, several anti-government protests worked off in several areas of the country during the day.
The Director General of Health Services today announced that the lifting of the mandatory face mask requirement outdoors has been temporarily suspended. The decision was taken considering the large amount of public gatherings currently taking place in the country, he says.
The Director General of Health Services, Dr. Asela Gunawardena, announced today that the lifting of the mandatory face mask requirement outdoors has been temporarily suspended. This comes after newly appointed Minister of Health Chanda Jayasuriya announced that wearing face masks in public will not be mandatory from the 18th of April, except in public transport and at indoor functions. However, Dr. Gunawardena issued a new media communique today, reversing the earlier decision and stating that face masks must be worn outdoors as before. The ministry said the decision was temporarily suspended considering the large public gatherings currently taking place in the country. The Health Ministry further added that the new decision comes into effect from today, the 21st of April. However, other measures stipulated such as body temperature checks and recording of personal information when entering a location will remain unnecessary. Now, Sri Lanka received another diesel shipment yesterday.
The shipment of 40,000 metric tons of diesel arrived in Sri Lanka under the Indian line of credit. And so far, India has supplied Sri Lanka with around 400,000 metric tons of various types of fuel under the facility. According to the Ceylon Petroleum Corporation, Sri Lanka will finish using around $400 million from the credit line by the end of April. Further, the facility is also expected to end by the second week of May. Meanwhile, on the country's power cut situation, 3-hour and 20-minute power cuts will be implemented by the Ceylon Electricity Board tomorrow, following a request by the Public Utilities Commission. With the Russian invasion of Ukraine marking its 57th day today, Russia claimed a military victory in the key Ukrainian port city of Mariupol. Meanwhile, reports are emerging that President Joe Biden will announce plans to ban Russian-affiliated ships from American ports as the latest bid made by Western allies to increase pressure on Russia over the invasion.
President Vladimir Putin claimed victory in the biggest battle of the Ukraine war, declaring the port of Mariupol liberated after nearly 2 months of siege, despite hundreds of defenders still holding out inside the giant steelworks. In the same time, President Putin has ordered his military to ditch its plan to storm the Azovstal steel plant in the besieged city of Mariupol, where several thousand Ukrainian troops as well as civilians are encamped, opting instead to continue to seal off the facility via blockade. Putin instructed his defense minister to block off the industrial areas so that a fly cannot pass through. Putin also called on the remaining Ukrainian fighters in Azovstal who had not yet surrendered, saying Russia would treat them with respect and would provide medical assistance to those injured. However, according to reports, it is unclear how many soldiers remain at the site, and some estimates as many as 2,000 soldiers remain captured at Azovstal. In this backdrop, Ukraine's deputy prime minister said that the agreed humanitarian corridor to evacuate civilians from the Azovstal factory had not worked as planned. The Prime Minister announced that at least 1,000 civilians and 500 wounded soldiers need to be brought out immediately. Ukrainian officials further accused Russian forces of failing to observe a local ceasefire agreement to allow women, children and elderly people to flee the besieged city of Mariupol. Further reports are emerging this afternoon that Joe Biden will announce plans to ban Russian-affiliated ships from American ports later today. This would be the latest bid by Western allies to increase pressure on Russia over the invasion of Ukraine, which has reached a 57th day. Meanwhile, President Biden has confirmed that he met with the Ukrainian Prime Minister to speak about the war with Russia earlier today. He described the upcoming days of a war as a critical window as Russia advances in the east in the next stage of the devastating conflict.
And that's all the news we have for you tonight. We hope you join us again tomorrow at the same time. Good night.